Again, good afternoon, everyone. Weird week we've had. This past week, actually, I was on retreat in Tucson, Arizona. No, don't. I should have stayed home because we were closed for so many days. I could have did my retreat here and they'd taken another week off some other time. I was supposed to leave on Sunday and they called and canceled my plane, so I left Monday morning at 5 o'clock in the morning to drive 30 miles an hour to the airport. But it was okay because, well, first of all, Texans don't know how to drive in that weather, but nobody was on the road because everything was closed, so it only took me half an hour to get to the airport. But as I got to the airport and was thinking, I thought, I don't have a homily prepared for today, because I got back yesterday evening. And it was like, okay, during my retreat, I will reflect on the Gospels. And then I said, no, Michael, I am required to take a retreat yearly to get and to redevelop my relationship with God, to nourish my own spirituality. As they say, you can't give what you don't have. So I didn't look at the readings until yesterday as I was boarding the plane in Phoenix to come back. And again, with the weather it is, that we were delayed again. But I got back, and on the plane ride, I'm looking at the readings and thinking about the readings, these Beatitudes. I'm trying to figure out what I want to say, and something came to me, and I don't know if it's something you've heard before, or was just a new way of me to understand them, I guess. But first we have to take into account that Jesus, when he spoke to his disciples, he spoke in the language of his time, the Aramaic language. He spoke that language to his disciples, and when St. Matthew transcribed the disciples 80 years later, he wrote them in Greek. 300 years after that, St. Jerome translated them from Greek to Latin. And so there might be some kind of nuances in the words that were used. I was trying to think of a practical example of that, and I thought about my sister. If I would say to my sister, I like the color red, meaning like a deep red, maroon, she wouldn't think that. She would automatically translate that in her mind to scarlet because she was an Ohio State Buckeye fan. So the red, but it's still red, just with a different nuance in it. What do you hear when you hear the word blessed? Blessed are they. Most of the theologians today would say it would equate to something like happy. Happy are those people who trust in God. Blessed are they who put their trust in God. And that makes sense to me. But I did hear another translation of that word of blessed meaning being set apart for God. And that was the image that struck with me for that time in the airport and the plane ride back. Blessed are being set apart from God, for God. I'm going to come back to that, being set apart for God, but I want to tell you two quick stories that for me illustrate the point I want to make. One was in 2002, when I took my first pilgrimage to Rome. We went there and the tour guide had us set up to do the general audience of John Paul II. We got to St. Peter's Square early in the morning, and it's all blocked off so that the Pope Mobile could go down these special routes and everything. So we got there early, and as we filed into the rows, she said, don't sit in a row. Sit 2 by 2 along the barricade. That way, everyone will be able to see the Pope as he drives by. You're not going to be 20 people back. She said, but don't think you're going to be in the first row, because people will elbow their way in front of you. I thought, well, we're in the Vatican. That's not going to happen. Silly me. The Pope comes driving through. We all stand up. The next thing you know, there are elbows in our midsections from these little nuns who wanted to get a front row vision of the Pope. That's story number one. Story number two, I had the opportunity, and some of these you might have heard in various homilies or bulletin things. I had the opportunity to meet Mother Teresa. She came to Washington, D.C. for a profession of her sisters. And we were invited to go to the Mass of the profession and to listen to Mother Teresa. I'm not going into the whole story, but as she came out of the church, she saw me, or out of the church, going into the vestibule, she saw me in my habit, and she took my hand, and she looked at me. Now, she's only this tall, literally, she's only this tall. And she took my hand, and she looked up at me, and she said, "Pray for me." And I looked down on her, and I said, "No." I meant to say, "No, you pray for me." But when I realized whose hand I was holding, it blanked out. So I rushed to the vestibule and I tried to get her attention, but there were so many people crowded around her that I hope she's in heaven now praying for that Franciscan who said no to her. Okay. But I started thinking about how people clamor to see the Pope, how people were so anxious to see Mother Teresa. And I started thinking about this being set apart from God. And I think that's why we want to see the Pope, or we want to see these holy people, because we in our mind know they're set apart by God to do whatever mission God is asking of them. But if we go back to the Beatitudes that we heard today, Jesus takes his disciples up the mountain and he says to them, "Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the persecuted." Those are the people set apart for God. Then I started asking myself, why don't we clamor to be with the people who mourn? Why don't we clamor to be with the homeless? Why do we find it so difficult to do the corporal works of mercy, to be with these people that God calls blessed? We clamor to see our idols, we clamor to see the popes or the saints, but the ones that God say are set apart for him are the people who are imprisoned in their own loneliness, or the people who are hungry, the people who are homeless. Those are the people that have a special place in God's heart. So maybe the question just to leave with you today is, why sometimes do we react so slowly to being with those people who God has set apart for himself? Why do we have the corporal works of mercy, but we don't want to get involved? We should want to get with these people as much as we wanted to see the Pope or Mother Teresa or whoever it may be. So just ask yourself, what's holding you back from doing the corporal works of mercy to be with the people God has called blessed? I invite you to stand as we profess our faith. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty.